The horses came back on a Sunday morning. Both of them. Together. That was the part no one could explain. Nora Gaines heard them before she saw them. The familiar sound of hooves on the packed dirt of the lane, the particular rhythm of two horses moving at a walk, unhurried, like they were coming home from an ordinary day. She was at the kitchen window. The light was still low and gray, the mist sitting heavy in the hollow below the house, the tree line a dark smudge against the early sky. She looked out. The horses came up the lane single file, Chester first, then the bay mare Vita, still hitched to nothing. The traces hung loose at their sides, swinging with each step. The doubletree was gone. The whiffle trees were gone. What remained of the harness was intact, correctly buckled, correctly fitted, the way Clement always put it. Not torn, not cut, disconnected, at the coupling points, like someone had taken the time. She stood at the window and watched them come up the lane and turn into the yard on their own, the way they always did, the way they had done 1,000 times before. Chester went to the trough. Vita stood in the middle of the yard and looked at the house. Nora looked back at her. Then she went to get her coat. Clement Gaines had left on Friday morning. He was taking a load of barrel staves to the mill at Calder Creek, about 14 miles northeast, a trip he had made a dozen times. He expected to be back by Friday evening, Saturday morning at the latest, if he stayed the night at the mill house. He was a careful man, a deliberate man. He did not make promises he couldn't keep, and he had promised her Friday or Saturday. Sunday was 2 days past Friday. She had told herself, through Saturday night, through the long and ordinary-seeming dark of it, that the road was muddy from the week's rain, that the creek was running high, that he had decided to wait. Clement was not a man who took chances with a loaded wagon on a bad road. He would wait out the mud. He would send word if he could. No word had come, and now the horses were home without him. She put on her coat and went out into the yard and stood beside Vita, who turned her head toward her and stood still to be touched. The mare's coat was dry, not road dry, not the particular stiffness of a horse that had come a long way through wet country, just dry, clean, nearly, like she had not been out in the rain at all. It had rained Friday night. Nora ran her hand along Vita's flank and looked at the traces again, the clean disconnection of them. She crouched down and looked at the coupling hardware, the iron pins and eyes, the swivel joints, all of it intact, all of it properly released. Not an accident, not a spook, not a broken tongue, and a panicked team that had run until the wagon gave way. Released. She stood up. She looked at the lane, which ran north toward the ridge road, which ran northeast toward Calder Creek. The mud was still soft from the rain, and she could see the hoofprints coming down. 2 sets, side by side for most of it. Then single file where the lane narrowed at the fence gate. She looked at the tracks for a long time. Then she went inside and put more water on and thought about what to do next. Her nearest neighbor was a man named Dub Foley, about 1.5 miles south along the ridge road. He was a widower, 60-something, had lived in this part of the Ozarks his whole life. He was the first person she thought of, and she thought of him not because he would have answers, but because he was the kind of man who knew when not to speak, and she needed that quality right now, more than she needed anything else. She saddled Chester. Vita she left in the yard, not wanting to move her yet, not wanting to disturb whatever evidence she thought might be present, though she could not have said precisely what evidence she was protecting, and rode down to Dub Foley's place. He was already up, already outside, splitting wood in the gray morning. He saw her coming and put down the maul without being asked. She told him what had happened. Short, in order. He listened with his hands in his pockets, looking at the ground in front of her horse. When she was done, he was quiet for a moment. "How long ago did they come in?" he said. "Maybe an hour." "Harness intact?" "Yes. Released at the couplings. Both sides." He thought about that. "Not a runaway," he said. "No." Another silence. "I'll get my horse," he said. They rode north together, up the ridge road toward Calder Creek. The morning was brightening, but the mist was still thick in the low places, pooling in the creek bottoms and the hollows between the ridges, so that the road ahead of them would sometimes disappear into white and then emerge again, dripping and clear. Dub rode without talking. Nora was grateful for that. She was thinking about the harness, about the time it would take to disconnect a team in the field, to work the coupling pins, to unbuckle the traces, to do it correctly and completely. That was not a panicked action. That was not something that happened in an emergency. It required calm. It required deliberateness. Someone had decided to send the horses home. She held that thought and turned it over. Decided. Not discovered the wagon broken and the team loose. Decided. Actively undone the coupling, actively sent the animals south. Which meant either Clement had done it himself, for reasons she could not immediately imagine. And if Clement had done it, where was he? And why had he not come with them or sent any word? Or someone else had? She did not pursue the second possibility very far yet. She was saving it. They found the road undisturbed for the first 6 miles. The mud held tracks clearly. Wagon ruts, hoof prints, the occasional boot print at the soft shoulders where a driver might step down. The ruts that matched Clement's wagon were visible for a while. The track of a heavily loaded rig. The right side wheel slightly deeper than the left, the way it always was because of how the load settled. Then the ruts stopped. Not gradually. Not merged into harder ground or washed out by crossing water. They stopped at a place where the road bent around the shoulder of a limestone ridge, where the ground was still soft and muddy, where there was no reason for them to stop. The wagon had been here. The ruts came in from the south and stopped. No ruts continuing north. No ruts turning off the road, just ended. Dub pulled up his horse and looked. Nora looked too. The hoofprints continued north without the wagon ruts. Just the hoofprints, deep and close-spaced, a standing team shifting weight, and then lighter, moving north, moving away, going home. He unloaded here, Dub said. But he said it the way a man says something he doesn't quite believe, testing it. Nora looked at the sides of the road, the brush, the slope of the limestone shoulder. No barrel staves, no sign that a load had been set down, no compression marks in the soft ground on the verge, no stave ends caught in the brush. "No," she said. Dub was quiet. She got down from Chester and walked the area carefully. Hoof prints, yes, 2 sets, the prints of a standing team, deep and churned where they had waited. Then 1 set of boot prints. 1 person, medium-sized boot, walking from the wagon position back south along the road for maybe 20 feet. And then nothing. No print leading away into the brush. No print continuing south along the road past that point. Just 20 feet of boot prints, and then the mud was undisturbed. She stood looking at the last boot print. The toe was pointed south. Whoever had been standing there had been facing south, back toward home. "Dub," she said. He came and looked. They stood together looking at the last boot print for a long moment. "Could be he walked back on harder ground," Dub said. "Up on the limestone." She looked at the limestone shoulder. It was possible. The rock there was solid and would hold no print. "Yes," she said. "Could be." But the way the road lay, a man walking south from that point would have had to cross 30 feet of soft mud to reach the limestone shoulder, and there were no crossing prints. She did not say that. Dub knew it too. She could tell from the quality of his silence. They pressed north. The road continued through the mist, up over the ridge, and down the far side into the next creek valley, the country getting rougher and more wooded as they went. The leaves were turning. Late October, the hills going red and yellow above the gray of the limestone outcrops, and the light that filtered through was thin and flat, the kind of light that made distances hard to read. There was no more sign of the wagon, no further ruts, no staves on the road or in the ditch, no piece of hardware, no scrap of canvas, no trace that a loaded rig had come this way. The road showed other tracks, other wagons, older, dried out, but nothing matching the weight and the track width of Clement's. It was as if the wagon had simply stopped existing at that bend in the road. She was careful with that thought. She was a practical woman. She did not allow herself imprecise thinking. The wagon had not stopped existing. It was somewhere. Everything that existed went somewhere, even when you couldn't follow it. She kept riding. They reached Calder Creek in the early afternoon. The mill was running. She could hear it from the road, the low thrum of the wheel, the creak and knock of the works. The mill house sat back from the creek on a raised shelf of ground, a substantial building, well kept, smoke coming from the chimney. The miller was a man named Ott Pruitt, who had run this mill for 20 years, and who Nora had met a handful of times when she'd come with Clement on his stave runs. He was a short, square man, with flour dust in the creases of his face, and he came to the door of the mill house when he heard them ride up, and he looked at Nora, and then at Dub, and then at Nora again. He knew already, she thought, something in his face. "Clement make his delivery?" she said. Ott Pruitt looked at her for a moment. "No," he said. She had expected this. She had known since the bend in the road, but hearing it said plainly still did something to her chest. "When did you last see him?" she said. "Thursday," he said. "He came by Thursday on his way home from Hanford. Stopped in for a cup. Said he'd be back Friday with a load." He paused. "When he didn't come Friday, I figured the road." "The road?" "It rained Thursday night. Creek was up Friday morning. I figured he waited on the south side." "He didn't," Nora said. Ott Pruitt looked at her steadily. "No," he said. "I see that." There was a silence. The mill wheel turned. The creek ran cold and full beside them. "Did you see anyone else on the road?" Dub asked. "Thursday, Friday. Anyone you didn't know?" Ott thought about that. "Thursday afternoon," he said slowly. "There was a man. Stopped for water. Didn't say much." He paused. "Had a mule. No load." "What did he look like?" "Tall, thin, had a look about him." Ott stopped, seemed to decide something. "I didn't like his eyes," he said. "I know that's not much to go on. Which way did he go when he left?" Nora said. South, Ott said, back the way Clement would have been coming. The mill wheel turned. Nobody said what they were all thinking. They rode south in the afternoon, back the way they'd come. The mist had cleared, but the light was flat and gray now, the clouds thickening from the west, the smell of rain coming. Nora rode without speaking. She was assembling what she knew, the way she assembled anything, carefully, without gaps, not moving forward until each piece was in its place. What she knew. Clement had left Friday morning with a full load of barrel staves. The wagon ruts showed him getting as far as the bend in the road at the limestone shoulder, 6 miles north. At that point, the wagon ruts stopped. No wagon had arrived at the mill. The horses had come home Sunday morning, harness intact, released at the couplings, dry coats, a standing team's deep hoof prints at the point where the ruts ended. A man with a mule and no load had come south on Thursday, had not been seen again. A set of boot prints that ended in soft mud, toe pointed south. She thought about the boot prints. She thought about the time between Thursday afternoon and Friday morning. The man with the mule going south. Clement coming north the next day with the loaded wagon. She thought about the coupling hardware, the deliberateness of it. If Clement had released the team, he had done it for a reason. He had been standing, present, conscious when he did it. The boot prints were medium-sized. She thought of Clement's boots, had dressed beside him 10,000 mornings, knew his boot size the way she knew every other particular of the man. Medium-sized. She thought about what you would do if you were in trouble on a road and needed to send for help. You would send the horses. You would send them home to your wife, who would come looking. You would stand at the road and watch them go south, and then you would— The boot prints ended facing south. She stopped her horse. Dub pulled up beside her. He sent them on purpose, she said. Dub looked at her. He was in trouble, she said. He released the horses himself and sent them home. He was standing there watching them go. She paused. And then something happened. Nora, the prints end mid-road, she said. He was standing, and then he wasn't. There's no track of him going anywhere. Dub was quiet for a moment. Could be he was pulled up onto the rock, he said. Could be, she said. Neither of them believed it. They stopped again at the bend in the road. The hoof prints were still there in the mud, undisturbed. She got down and looked more carefully this time, with the afternoon light coming at a lower angle, which showed the ground's texture differently. She found something she had missed the first time. In the mud, just at the edge of where the horse prints churned the ground, there was a mark. Not a boot print. Something narrower, something that had been pressed down once and dragged slightly. The heel drag of a mark that had been made by something or someone being moved. Not a fall, not a stumble, a drag mark, short, ending at the limestone edge of the road shoulder. She crouched over it and looked at it for a long time without touching it. Then she looked at the limestone shoulder, the solid rock that held no print, the rock that ran north along the road for maybe 60 yards before the soil started again. He was moved, she said quietly. Not to Dub, just to herself. Then she stood up. I want to look in the brush on the far side of the rock shelf, she said. They found the wagon there, 60 yards north on the far side of the limestone shoulder, down a short drop where the rock shelf ended, and the ground fell away into a shallow ravine, filled with cedar, hidden from the road by the rock and the brush. You would not see it from the road. You would have to know to look, or to come around the far side of the ridge on foot. The wagon was intact. The staves were still loaded, lashed down undisturbed. The wagon tongue was down in the dirt. No damage to the bed, to the wheels, to the frame. Just the wagon, sitting in the cedar brush in the ravine, exactly as Clement had left it, or as it had been left for him. No Clement. She stood at the edge of the ravine and looked at it for a long time. The wagon was too heavy to move far without a team. Someone had unhitched the horses, driven or led the wagon off the road and down into the ravine, re-examined the load. She could see that one of the lash ropes had been untied and retied, the knot slightly different, and then walked away. With or without Clement, she couldn't tell which. She climbed down into the ravine and walked around the wagon slowly. She looked at the ground. The cedar duff was thick and held prints poorly, but she found a boot mark near the front wheel, different from the tracks at the road. Larger, longer stride. 2 people then, at minimum. She put her hand on the wagon board. The wood was cold. It had been here since Friday at least, through Friday night's rain and Saturday. Nora, Dub's voice from the top of the ravine. She looked up. His face was careful. He was looking at something she couldn't see from where she stood. She climbed up. He was looking north along the road. About 40 yards away, where the road curved into heavier timber, something was hanging from a low branch at the edge of the road. She walked toward it. It was Clement's hat, hung there by its brim over a branch stub, like a man hangs a hat on a peg by the door. Deliberate. At about the height a man would hang a hat if he wanted it found. The inside brim had a dark stain on it. She didn't touch it. She looked at it for a moment, and then looked at the timber beyond it, the road curving into the dark of it, the light failing in there, under the canopy even in the afternoon. She turned back. Dub was watching her. "We need more people," she said. "Yes," he said. "And we need to go now, before the light's gone." "Yes," he said again. She took one more look at the hat, at the dark stain on the inside brim, at the way it had been hung, not thrown, not dropped, not tangled by accident in the branches. Placed. Someone had placed it there, had taken it from wherever Clement was and hung it on a branch like a marker, like a sign meant to be read. She did not know what it said. She rode south. They organized a search the next morning. 7 men, including Dub, including a man named Reese Tarrant, who had done some law work in the county before his knees gave out. They rode out before first light, and by mid-morning had covered the road from the bend to the heavy timber and 2 miles beyond. They found the mule. It was tied to a tree a 1/4 mile into the timber, off a game trail that ran east from the road. Thin, thirsty, had been there at least since Friday. There was a saddlebag over its back, and in the saddlebag there was money. Coins, a folded roll of paper currency, and a pair of gloves that were not Clement's, and a folded piece of brown paper with nothing written on it. The empty paper sat in Reese Tarrant's hands for a moment. "Either he didn't have time," Reese said, "or he couldn't," Nora said. Reese looked at her. "Couldn't write," he said. "Couldn't be understood," she said. "If he tried." She didn't explain that further, and Reese didn't ask her to. They found no other trace of the man with the mule. No camp, no further sign. He had come from somewhere to the north, and he had tied his animal, and then he had apparently ceased to exist in the way that men left traces in country. Or he had been very careful. Or both, They did not find Clement. They searched for 3 days. On the 2nd day, they found a boot. One boot, right foot, size consistent with Clement's, about a mile east of the road and heavy timber. No second boot. No other clothing. No indication of what had separated a man from one of his boots in the middle of the woods. On the 3rd day, they found a fire ring. Old, at least a week, maybe more, predating Friday entirely. A careful fire ring, built with flat stones, the ash dispersed, the kind of ring a man made if he was staying more than one night and cared about not leaving much sign. Large enough for warmth rather than just cooking. Someone had been waiting in those woods. Not for a day. For days. He knew Clement was coming, Reese said, looking at the fire ring. He knew the road, Nora said. He knew the schedule. Who knew Clement's schedule? She thought about that. The mill at Calder Creek, the buyers at Hanford, the men at the stave operation, anyone who had done business with him in the past several weeks, which was not a small number of people in a county where everyone knew everyone's movements in the way of rural life. Too many, she said. Reese nodded. On the 4th day, they suspended the search. The weather had turned cold, and the men had their own work to return to. Reese Tarrant said he would make inquiries. He said it with the particular tone of a man who is not sure inquiries will produce anything, but who needs to say something. Nora thanked him. She rode home. The wagon was brought back on the 5th day, Dub and 2 of his sons hauling it up out of the ravine and down the road. The stave load was intact. The barrel staves were eventually sold. The money covered the winter. She did not touch the horses for a week. She could not have said exactly why. They were fed and watered and cared for. She did not neglect them. But she did not ride them, did not harness them, did not stand in the paddock with them the way she usually did in the evenings. She looked at them from the fence sometimes. Chester grazed and ignored her. Vida watched her back, steady and calm, the same way she had looked at her from the yard on Sunday morning, like she was waiting for a question. Nora didn't ask it. She was afraid of what the answer would look like. Not afraid of the mare, afraid of what she herself would understand, or fail to understand, standing there in the dark, with an animal that had been at that bend in the road and had come home without her husband, and could not tell her what she needed to know. She did not want to stand that close to the limit of what could be known. Reese Tarrant came by in November with what he'd found. He sat at her table and told her plainly, because he was that kind of man. The tall, thin man with the mule had been seen twice more, or someone like him. Once at a trading post 40 miles northeast, about a week after Friday. Once on the Missouri border, 3 weeks later. Both times alone. Both times with a mule and no other animal. The descriptions matched. Mostly. No wagon, no barrel staves, no Clement. Did anyone speak to him? Nora asked. At the trading post, Reese said. The man there said he bought flour and salt and didn't say much. Asked about road conditions north. A pause. The man at the post said he had a way about him. Said he felt, well, I'm giving you his words. He said he felt like the man already knew the answers to the questions he was asking. Nora looked at her hands. Like he was making conversation, she said. That's what the man said. For whose benefit? Reese looked at her. That's the question, he said. She sat with that. The money in the saddlebag, she said. Whose was it? Couldn't determine, Reese said. Nothing marked. Could be anyone's. Was it enough to have been worth? She stopped, started again. Was it enough to explain it? Reese was quiet for a moment. No, he said. It wasn't. The fire burned. Outside, November had stripped the last of the leaves, and the hills were bare and gray, the ridgelines sharp against the pale sky. "What do you think happened to him?" she said. She had not asked anyone this yet. She had been saving it. Reese looked at his cup. "I think the man with the mule followed him," he said carefully. "I think he'd been watching the road for some time. I think when Clement reached that bend, he was stopped. He paused. I think what happened after that was not something Clement chose. He didn't say the rest of it. She didn't need him to. It fit, but it fit too clean. She had been turning the pieces over long enough to know that things which fit too clean usually meant you were missing something, that the shape you'd assembled was only one possible shape, that somewhere there was a piece that didn't belong in this version of the story. She didn't say that to Reese. She wasn't sure it would change anything. "But he released the horses," she said. "He had time to do that." "Yes," Reese said. "He did. Which means he knew something was wrong before it went wrong. It seems so. And the first thing he did—" Her voice was steady. She made it steady. "The first thing he did was send the horses home to me." Reese said nothing. "So I would know," she said. "So I would come looking. So there would be a trail." She looked at the window, at the gray November hills. "He knew I would come looking," she said. "He knew you," Reese said quietly. She went back to the bend in the road in December, alone. Early morning, frost on the ground, the mud frozen hard in the boot prints and the drag mark preserved in it, like something cast in iron, perfectly readable now in a way the soft mud of October had not been. She crouched over the drag mark for a long time. Then she stood and walked north to where the hat had been. The branch was bare now, the hat long since taken by Reese as evidence of something. But she knew the branch. She could pick it out. She stood beneath it and looked north into the timber. The road went dark in there quickly, the trees close and tall, the sky a narrow stripe overhead. She thought about Clement standing at this road, the team unhitched and turned south, watching them go. She thought about what that had cost him. The horses were his fastest way out of whatever was happening. He had given them up deliberately, had sent them home instead. For her. She thought about the hat placed on the branch. Placed by someone else, not Clement. The boot size was wrong, the stride was wrong. Placed by the man with the mule, or by someone else entirely. Placed to be found, the dark stain on the inside brim. A marker, but for whose benefit? If it was left for a searcher to find, it was placed too deliberately, too neatly. It had the quality of a signature, not a signal. I was here. This is mine. She stood in the cold and thought about that. A man who wanted to leave a mark, who placed things carefully. The hat, the fire ring, the mule tied where it would be found eventually, but not immediately. Who had asked about road conditions going north, already knowing them. Who had a way about him that made people feel the conversation was for his benefit, not theirs. A man doing something he had planned. But the money in the saddlebag, left behind, not taken. She kept coming back to that. If you planned a thing for money, you took the money. You did not tie your mule to a tree and leave the saddlebag and walk away. Unless the money was never the point. Unless it had been left there deliberately. Like the hat, like the fire ring, like all of it, a careful arrangement of things meant to be read. A message in objects, because there would be no other message. She stood very still in the cold morning. If it was a message, it was not for her. She had not been the intended reader. She was adjacent to the intended reader. She was the searcher who would find the objects and report them, and the report would travel, the way reports traveled in hill country, through the men who came to search, through Reese Tarrant's inquiries, through the trading post, along the roads north, to someone who would understand what the arrangement meant. She did not know who that was. She did not know what Clement had been to that person, or what debt or history had brought a man with a fire ring and a patient mule to this particular bend in this particular road in October. She might never know. She looked one more time into the dark timber. Then she turned and walked back to her horse. Vida watched her from across the paddock when she got home. She stopped at the fence. She and the mare looked at each other for a long moment. Then Nora opened the gate and went in. She stood beside Vida and put her hand on the mare's neck and felt the warmth of the animal, the slow breathing, the steady life of her. The mare did not move. Nora stood there for a long time, her hand on Vida's neck, looking north at the ridge. The sky was pale and high and cold. The hills were bare. Somewhere up there the road ran through the timber and bent around the limestone shoulder, and the frozen mud held its marks, and the branch stood bare where the hat had been. She did not say anything. There was nothing to say. But she stood there until the cold drove her in, and it was a long time before the cold drove her in. Reese Tarrant made one more trip in the spring. He came in April, when the mud had softened again and the hills were greening up, and he sat at her table and told her the last of it. The man with the mule had not been seen again after the Missouri sighting in November. No further trace north or south. A man who walked into the country and did not come back out, or came back out somewhere no one was watching. Clement had not been found. "I want to tell you," Reese said, "that I don't believe this is over. I think there are people north of here who know more than they've said. I think there are connections I haven't found yet." "But you won't find them," she said, not unkindly. He looked at her. "Probably not," he said honestly. She nodded. "The horses came home," she said. "That's what I know. The rest of it—" She stopped. "The rest of it is someone else's story. I was only ever on the edge of it." Reese looked at her for a moment. "That's a hard place to be," he said. "Yes," she said. "It is." After he left, she sat at the table for a while. She thought about the edge of things, about being close enough to feel the weight of something without being able to see its shape, about standing at a bend in the road and knowing at the last that the most useful thing you could do was send the horses home. She thought about Clement making that choice. Calm, deliberate. The coupling pins worked free, the traces unclipped, the team turned south and urged forward, watching them go. He had known she would come. He had known she would find what there was to find. He had trusted her with the finding of it, even though the finding led nowhere, even though the trail ended in frozen mud and a hat on a branch and a message she was never meant to read. He had trusted her anyway. She went to the window. The spring hills were green and pale, the new leaves still small, the ridgelines still visible through them. Vida was in the paddock, watching the house. The man with the mule was never identified. Clement Gaines was never found. The boot, The single right boot sat on the shelf above Nora's fireplace for the rest of her life. She never explained to anyone why she kept it there. She never had to. The people who came to her house looked at it and looked at her and understood that some things were kept, not because they gave you answers, but because they proved the question was real and that it had never really been answered. Not by the search, not by Reese, not by anything she'd found at that bend in the road. The horses had come home. That was all she knew for certain. Everything else was a shape she'd made from what was missing. If this story stayed with you, there are more waiting. Subscribe and come back tomorrow. These are the stories from the edges of the recorded world.